Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Siska, Executive Director of the Chicago Justice Project and your host for the Chicago Justice Show. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. We're very happy today to have with us today Bob Boik, Executive Director of CPD's Office of Constitutional Policing and Reform, Dylan Fitzpatrick, Research Director, Crime and Urban Labs at the University of Chicago Urban Labs, and Maggie Goodrich, who's a consultant and project director on the Officer Support System and a retired Chief Information Officer for the Los Angeles Police Department. All right, so today we're going to be discussing the Officer Support System, which, if I got my timing right, got deployed through a trial prototype in the 5th District earlier in 20, and it was developed by the Crime Lab. This is kind of a second coming for this type of system. There was one earlier deployed somewhat to a degree in the early to mid 90s, and then called Brainmaker, actually, and it was actually erased due to pressure from the Fraternal Order of Police. So now 20 years later, we have a new system in place, and we're going to be digging into how it works, how it can benefit officers, and what benefits the community might see out of this system. So coming up on the show next Monday, we have 49th Ward Alderman Maria Haddon talking about the Anjanette Young ordinance that she took part in writing. Wednesday, the 24th, which is a week from this Wednesday, we have 20th Ward Alderman Jeanette Taylor talking about menu money and whether or not that menu money should be, what it should be spent on, whether it should be spent on cameras and license plate readers that I am assuming are in a response to issues that the city is experiencing. And honestly, multiple cities across the country are experiencing with carjacking. I get very upset when local reporters keep talking about these things as if they're happening in silos. They are not. Chicago does have some issues with violence that may be siloed to us, but this issue around carjackings is not. It's a national phenomenon, or at least around large cities. If you're interested in sponsoring this show, you'll see an image on the screen soon. There's also going to be a link posted in the chat. You can sponsor that show by following the link. And if you're interested in corporate sponsorships, we're rolling that out this week. If you're interested, you can get us at info@chicagojustice.org. There's a contact sheet at our website at chicagojustice.org. Go there and let us know. We'll be happy to work out a custom plan for you. Okay, so let's get to our first segment today. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to be here.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to start. Bob, my question to you is, why is this system different than the previous version the city, or is it different than the previous version the city tried to deploy a little over 20 years ago, and now about 25 years ago?
Well, I'm not really the expert on what the city tried to employ and deploy 20 years ago, but obviously the world has come a long way in 20 years, and particularly the use of data science has evolved tremendously really in the last decade. So certainly dramatically different from where we were 20 years ago. But, I would say that what we're attempting to implement here in the Chicago Police Department is a data-driven tool that will enable supervisors to have meaningful dialogue with their employees, and then some sort of protective support around what that dialogue is and what is determined to be necessary to help support our officers. So, while not being an expert on where we were 20 years ago, I'm willing to bet this is dramatically different from where we were back then.
All right, Maggie, so can you tell us a little bit about how were officers in the department involved in the development of this system? And who else besides them was involved in the development of the system?
So there were a lot of people involved in the development of the system. So when we structured this project from the beginning, we created an executive steering committee comprised of CPD leadership, But then that executive steering committee designated members from their own commands to participate in a working group. And that also included representation from the FOP and the other unions within Chicago to participate in a working group to really help come up with the right solutions for CPD. And then we also engaged a number of subject matter experts from across the country. So we created a national advisory committee and brought experts from all over the country, either from police departments who have engaged in similar efforts, either have implemented an early intervention system or have a robust employee assistance program, and then also engaged individuals from the mental health fields, academia, et cetera, to participate and really provide guidance and lessons learned from other efforts across the country. So it was really a large group effort.
Okay, Dylan, I'm going to turn to you on this one. And Maggie kind of talked about it a little bit already, but were there specifically other places in the country where this was developed that helped guide what was done here in Chicago with this system?
So really what I would say is that we wanted to do something a little bit differently with the system in Chicago. So traditionally with early warning systems like the OSS in Chicago, there's a set of decision makers who sort of think through using their intuition and expert judgment which factors go into the system, and then they set a set of pretty simple rules that would then identify officers to receive some sort of support. What we wanted to do here in Chicago is leverage, as Director Boik said, these advances in data science to do a more statistical, data-driven approach to identifying officers for support. So the idea really is to run off this premise that we can use statistical indicators to proactively identify those officers who would most benefit from a support service because they're at a greater likelihood of being involved in some future adverse event compared to your average officer. So we ended up arriving at a set of 4 types of adverse events that we wanted to predict using our data modeling process. And we chose a mix of events that gave us a set of outcomes that are both policy relevant and that the department really wants to prioritize these and prevent them with the OSS, and also predictable in that we could actually identify some statistical relationships that could help identify these high-risk officers before these adverse events occur.
It's so interesting. And I'm a huge fan of this. I'm not sure if Brainmaker was I don't know much about what was in it, so I can't say like, hey, they should have kept it, they should have used it. But I've always been a fan of like trying to do whatever you can to use data to, as best you can, understand the likelihood of events happening as best you can across the policing system. So Bob, we're going to go to you about, is this system, because I think a lot of times when the public hears this, especially in the atmosphere we're in over the last several years in Chicago, but they think this is all about an accountability system. This is big in the accountability system. So is the officer support system centered in the accountability system? Is this purely something about officer wellness? And I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm just trying to say, is it exclusively in either one of those kind of subject matter areas, or is it somehow overlapping those two systems?
I view it as being tied to officer wellness. I think the first point to make here is that this is any intervention, so to speak, that might be done as a result of someone being identified through the algorithm is non-disciplinary. So this is not an instance in which someone is going to, rise to the top of the list and then we're going to engage in a misconduct investigation. Based on what is flagged. I will say, though, that there are a variety of inputs that go into the data model, which my colleagues can speak to much better than I can. But we have to do a better job in the police department of stopping bad behavior before it occurs. And so what I think is really where we're trying to go with this, with the unique data model that was referred to, is really trying to be innovative in offering supports to individuals so that we can, wrap them in a variety of tools, whether that's counseling or more training, or our chaplains unit, or even just a basic conversation with the supervisor, to ensure that we are doing all that we can as an organization to prevent the problematic behavior from happening. So to prevent the instance of an excessive use of force incident, for example, or some other domestic abuse in one's personal life. Our officers obviously experience a great deal out there on the street, and I think we're viewing this through the lens of wellness and trying to do everything we can as an organization to ensure that we're on top of those areas where we might have some concerns regarding behavior.
Excellent. I haven't said anything I disagree with yet. Where's the controversy coming? So Maggie, the system was rolled out in the 5th District as a pilot program. Can you give us an update, at least to this point, how that has gone and if it has gone well, or if there's some plan to roll this out through the rest of the department, what a timeline might be on that?
Sure. The pilot has gone well. We've learned a lot from it, and that was really the intention. It was to get through the training, right? Go through the policy and procedures that we developed, use the computer application, and really get feedback from the end users in District 5, so that we could make some modifications and improvements and really get it right for a department-wide rollout. We are going to broaden the pilot into the 6th District, probably in a month or so, and Bob can speak more specifically to those timelines, but it'll be most likely in a month or two. Over the next 60 days, we'll go to likely the 6th District, and then start to broaden it thereafter. And again, we're trying to take the time after each expansion of this pilot to really engage the end users, get their feedback, and make some either adjustments or improvements based on what they tell us. And I will add, actually, just to the last discussion you were having around wellness and accountability. Actually, part of lessons learned also actually does tie tie accountability to it a little bit, in that the supervisors in this process are really heavily engaged, right? They're really the users of the system. It is absolutely about officer wellness and getting officers the support they need, but it's also holding supervisors accountable for really paying attention to what's going on with their officers, engaging with them, having meaningful conversations with them, and really just learning more about an officer's well-being so that they can get them to the support or training or whatever it may be that the officer needs. So as we've gone through this pilot, we have seen both the wellness side and the accountability side come into play here a bit.
Okay, Bill, I'm going to go to you. Can you give our audience an idea what data is specifically being fed into the system and looked at, so that we have a better idea of, because I don't think people understand what you would actually be looking at through kind of one of these systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So our data modeling process uses, just to give a quick summary of sort of how this process works, we use historical data records to find a set of specific key risk factors that really occurred with a higher frequency among officers who had adverse events in the past. So when we run these data models, you can really think of it as looking for the officers who are currently, working at CPD and doing their day-to-day work, who actually look very similar to those officers in the past when looked through the lens of these key risk factors. So to identify which of these risk factors were actually predictive, we started by gathering basically every possible distinct data source that we could find from CPD, so that we could basically throw the kitchen sink at our data models and let the statistical process determine actually which of these individual factors were actually informative and which were most useful to include in this data-driven OSS. So after going through this process, our models determined that it was really 3 data sources that were particularly useful in predicting future adverse events, and it's not super surprising. So we're really looking at previous complaints filed against an officer, information on previous uses of force, and information on departmental disciplinary actions for things like minor transgressions within the department. So I just want to be clear here now that this is not actually what we're trying to predict with the data models, but these are just factors that were predictive and occurred with higher frequency in these officers in the past who went on to experience adverse events on the job.
So if I can just follow up on that really quickly, you're trying to, what exactly are you trying to predict? The likelihood of them having a negative event in the future?
That's right. Yeah, and we really, we looked at a mix of 4 different adverse events that really include events occurring both on duty, such as a sustained complaint for excessive force or a complaint that led to suspension, as well as two categories of events that occur while off duty, including things like domestic violence or substance use complaints. And so we think that these off-duty models are especially important in a system aimed at officer wellness, since they capture a dimension of risk related to officer wellness that may not be picked up when we purely focus on predicting things like excessive force and on-the-job suspensions that are really reflected in these more traditional early warning systems.
Excellent. So Bob, can you take us through Officer John Smith gets flagged somehow in this system? What happens? What is that?
Yeah,
the next thing?
Yeah, so basically when someone gets flagged, we call it a work item. There is a conversation that then is had between the supervisor and the employee to kind of get to the root of what some of the issues might be. And then it's incumbent upon that supervisor to work with our team that we have located centrally at headquarters to work on what additional supports that officer might need. You know, I want to touch on one piece that Maggie brought up and really speak to that, the role of the supervisor in this effort, because that is really key. And I think we're looking broadly at the role of supervisors within CPD and trying to adopt a more 21st century approach of what a supervisor should do. So a supervisor has to be a leader, a mentor, a teacher. They have to be able to have difficult conversations with their employee. They have to be able to talk about performance. And some of these things might seem obvious to people outside of law enforcement, but within law enforcement, I would say this is an area of improvement. And so the key conversation really is that conversation between the employee and their supervisor. And so it's incumbent upon us to equip those supervisors to know what to do with a flagged item and to be able to have the right type, the right level of conversation with the employee. And then again, to focus on connecting that employee to whatever whatever additional support they may need to curb the problematic behavior.
Okay, it's interesting you bring that up. I've always had issues with the lack of management training. And I know the issues of training in CPD are large, and that could be a whole new set of series, or the lack of training. But I have always thought that I never understood why there wasn't management training. I'm in DC now. My wife finished her PhD. She's a PhD health economist, got a job out here in DC. And one of the first things they did was send her to a conference to learn things around management. And I just was kind of shocked around policing. I understand that you're hopefully promoting people that know from experience how to do their job they're leaving and are supposed to be supervising. But that doesn't mean you necessarily have the skills to manage. And the reality is, good managers are really hard to find. Whether you're in government or the private sector, they're incredibly hard. And I've always thought, at least, I've been doing police accountability work and researching around it 25 years. I've always thought that this was an issue that needed development. And I know when I talk to officers, and I have friends on the force, we talked about one who's retired recently, they complain about management. Not so much you can always hear conspiracy theories from people, but just like the lack of ability for someone to go to and get questions answered. And so I've always thought that's a problem. If this is something that's going to get addressed and we're going to build up within the department, I think that is great. Maggie, I'm going to turn to you. When an officer, I know we've talked, this isn't an accountability thing, but I necessarily tied into the accountability system. So when an officer gets flagged, this is hopefully through the supervisory role, you get them to buy in to getting or seeking the services that everyone thinks they need. What happens if they refuse?
So I think that's more of a policy issue for CPD. Bob may want to weigh in on that specifically in terms of whether an officer can refuse support or not.
So I'm happy to weigh in here. Yeah, I mean, Maggie's exactly right. It is a policy issue, one that we have to wrestle with. There is a role for collective bargaining in this. And again, while it's non-disciplinary, which I would say it probably would be the main hurdle if it were disciplinary, there still are inputs that have to occur. I think the fact that we thought about this on the front end, we included the FOP, on the committee that helped us develop this, I think we're hoping that pays dividends and that people see this as, what it is, which is our ability to wrap an individual in support and, again, prevent some of that, some behavior that may become problematic. I don't understand why anyone would have an issue with that, the FOP included. So I think definitely, while there are conversations to have, it is a policy discussion. This is something we want to make mandatory. So we are working toward that end.
Okay, well, all right. Now that brings me to my next question, actually. So the FOP was at the table, and that's encouraging. So is there general buy-in from management within FOP for this trial, for this rollout in the 5th District, and it's somewhat expansion through the system? Or is this something we're expecting at some point resistance is going to come in? I guess it's to you, but anyone who's got, can answer to it is fine.
I think, you'd have to ask the FOP, but again, what I would say is I have a hard time believing that they're going to object to something that really is a tool that officers themselves have been asking for a very long time, which is, wrap me in supports. If there's an issue, you won't find an officer out there that wants to engage in a bad use of force incident. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be the next YouTube sensation because, they had a bad incident caught on camera. So this is our attempt to do everything we can as an organization to prevent that. And I find it really hard to believe that the FOP would stand in the way of that.
Okay, now you brought that up, and this is a good time for this question. I've always thought that the Jason Van Dyke incident and the Laquan McDonald incident, looking at what happened, I was always shocked at what happened. And what came up in my head when I heard he had 27 complaints throughout his career from all over the city was that to some degree, he was let down by the system, right? Because when I hear Dylan and Maggie and all of you talk about negative incidents coming out at the back end of this, I think of Jason Van Dyke. Like, I think there may have been an intervention that could have come through a system like this with someone who racked up so many complaints throughout their career that may have stopped an incident like what we got with Laquan McDonald. So I'm not trying to equate, I'm not trying to equate what happened to Laquan's family. That is awful. But I do think to some extent, officers are let down by not having a system like this that can stave off a career-ruining incident. And unfortunately, in Jason's case, he lost his freedom too. So I'm not sure if I really have a question, but with that, it's just to me to say that I just think Jason was also let down. And for people who aren't buying into the system, I think there is real potential to stave off something like that you're not expecting to ever happen in your career. But if you continue down paths without the services, you can get there. Okay, there's my little rant in the midst of this. How are you planning on getting broad buy-in? I guess I'm going to go, Dylan, you can start this, and if anyone's got a comment on it, how do you get broad buy-in from rank and file patrol officers, the FOP membership, the guy on the street, let's say, or man or woman on the street, the first 5 or 10 years of career? How do you get buy-in for a system like this and get past the suspicion that is so built up within the ranks, unfortunately?
Yeah, well, I can definitely start us off, and then I'd love to hear others' perspectives as well. But I sort of think of this, at least from the data, science perspective, as getting away from this idea of a black box that no one can really understand. That is, say, flagging these officers for support, but then no one really knows why. That's the sort of spin that gets put on systems like this, I think, a lot of the time. And a lot of the recent work in applying data science to problems in public policy and public safety in general is aimed at improving transparency and explainability and understandability of these models. So, that's really a lot of the sort of heavy lifting that has gone into developing the OSS data models has been centered around, distilling some more complicated models into a points-based system that is really interpretable from for the supervisors themselves, so they can see that a certain number of points are being contributed from a single event in this officer's history. They can see, how these events are sort of weighted relative to each other, and they can really understand why the officers are being identified as part of the OSS. And the idea is that can actually help on the support side as well, and help develop an action plan for helping get that officer on better footing. But I think I'll hand it over to Maggie or Director Boik.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in a bit here. You have to have a great communications plan first, right? Officers really need to know what this is, and more importantly, what this isn't. Oftentimes with any new technology that you're deploying in a police department, what this isn't is sometimes more important, right? So explaining, I think first and foremost, that just because we are using the data and a data-driven approach does not mean this is Minority Report, right? Not everybody that is identified by the system will go on to have an adverse event, or will go on to even need additional support. But, going back to that accountability piece, right, the idea is to hold the supervisors accountable for touching base with the officers and figuring out if there is a need there, and really having that meaningful conversation, or sometimes a difficult conversation, and getting the officer what they need. And I think to that end, buy-in is also really based on, can you get officers what they need, right? Do you have the right supports and services and trainings in place to be able to offer to an officer who does need that assistance? And I think that's where the system in Chicago differs a bit as well, in that they really started with that question at the end. And you can have a perfect system that identifies officers who need support 100% of the time, but if you don't have those supports and services, and anything to really offer to an officer, then you're certainly not going to get that buy-in over time. And when we ran some focus groups very early on in this project, hands down, each focus group said that they wanted an expansion of the employee assistance program, and they wanted more access or greater access to employee assistance programs. So, and to their credit, I mean, CPD has expanded that quite a bit since the beginning of this project and since those focus groups. So I think all of those really factor in.
Okay, Maggie, I'm going to go back to you. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. I'm not sure if you wanted to comment on there. I don't want to cut you off if you were.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, but one thing I would add is that we are deliberately choosing the districts where this will expand to based on whether or not they have a program that we call unity of command. What that means is that a supervisor, a sergeant in particular, supervises the same police officers every day. It might surprise you to know that that's not how the department functions. We rotate day off groups, and so a supervisor could supervise one person one day, another person the next day, and it's this constant rotation. The Unity of Command program really puts us into a team structure. So the role of the supervisor is enhanced in that model, and in addition to that, you know, they're better equipped to identify, you know, certain trends with officers because they see them every day, they work with them every day, they know them a lot better. So you know, Maggie is 100% correct. Communication is key, but I think another piece is structural, and we have to move toward that model where supervisors supervise the same people every day. So the areas of expansion are going to be where we have implemented that particular supervision pilot.
It's so interesting. Yeah. You wouldn't think outsiders would have no idea that they're not being supervised by the same people every day, which is just kind of hard to know what they're doing if you're only seeing them once in a while. Okay. Obviously, in the last few weeks, we've had more examples. Suicide's a huge issue for policing, probably especially bigger in CPD, or at least it seems like it is. How is this system going to impact that, or hopefully cut that off from happening? Because obviously you're talking about officer care or officer wellness. That's a huge issue. So I guess, Maggie, I'm going to let you start at that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we want to get at, right, is preventing those officer suicides. And while, you know, we obviously with data cannot predict a suicide, what we can do is get officers who appear to need some assistance to the right type of assistance early on, right? And the point of the early intervention system is to really get to them before things are going wrong. And like I said, you know, CPD went to great lengths to expand that employee assistance program and really be able to make it available across the department. But the goal here is really to get the officers into that program early as they're identified. And the other thing I think is that the implementation of the system has really just started to create, I think, a really important dialogue across CPD. That's often you know, difficult, I think, in a law enforcement setting. You know, they're not typically talking about their own mental health on a regular basis. But part of, you know, the feedback we got from the pilot actually was, as a supervisor, if I identify someone else who I think needs assistance, maybe they weren't identified by this system, maybe they don't have a work item this month, but I think they need assistance, what can I do? And so the fact that they're asking those questions and that it's generating that kind of dialogue, I think is really positive. And that would be part of that communications plan that I mentioned earlier, to make sure that everybody understands the avenues by which they can get to those supports and services, and hopefully, you know, prevent a suicide and save a life.
All right, this is my last question, and I think I'm going to go to Bob on this one. Is there any analysis or any level of analysis that's done that may that goes beyond just, I guess, looking at the individual officer and looks at like maybe a unit where there are issues that there may be officers within that unit that have an issue that needs addressing. I don't know. I guess it's the last thing I'm thinking about relative to this.
Yeah, I think that analysis definitely has to be done, but I think, again, this is where the, rotating supervisor, rotating employee issue comes into play. I think we'll be far better positioned to have an analysis that tells us a lot more when we are in the team approach. But certainly, we do look at use of force incidents across units in the department. There are a number of use of force reporting requirements in particular that we have started to report out on, and we have a public dashboard out there where you can break it out by unit just to kind of see how it breaks down. But I think, we need a greater level of sophistication, and I think that stability in supervisor-employee relationship will help us, to really, I think, become far more sophisticated in that analysis.
All right, this is fascinating. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it, Bob, Maggie, Dylan. Thank you so much. Stay safe. And for the two of you in Chicago, enjoy the snow. I love looking at it from 500 miles away or whatever I am in DC. It's the greatest way to see snow.
Thank you.
Thanks for
having us.
Thanks, guys.
Join a group of engaged and committed individuals advocating for transparency and accountability in the local justice system around the country. Get engaged through crowdsourced research projects, digital activism, public policy advocacy, or become a social media ambassador. Our criminal justice system will not reform itself. Communities must demand it. Transparency can be the fuel for justice our local communities need to combat the weaponizing of data by our justice system. Transformation of our justice system cannot occur until we know exactly what they are doing and who they are doing it to. Get involved today. CJP Nation.
All right, welcome back. Thanks again, Bob, Maggie, and Dylan. Fascinating discussion. I have high hopes for this support system. I think it can hopefully, it's going to be very hard to prove a negative, but hopefully it really does some work supporting officers, relieving issues that they're dealing with, and then on the back end, because I'm an accountability guy, staves off major incidents like the Laquan McDonald one and others that I do think the department has let down the officers by not intervening earlier. So we're going to move to our second segment and talk about a couple of stories that have hit the news. Our first one is one of our favorites, or least favorites, I guess is better the way to say it. Fran Spielman, an article that came out a few days ago, late last week, about Lori Lightfoot explains why she stalled civilian review. She explained nothing. Don't be surprised. It's a Fran Spielman article. She is clickbait most of the time. She loves using explosive quotes and explosive headlines, and then never, ever delivers in the article and never asks the real important follow-up questions. She explained nothing in this story. So this is basically about Lori Lightfoot, our mayor, or not my mayor, but Chicago's mayor, giving a talk about, I think it was through Great Cities at UIC and either, I think, Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a talk about, I think that featured Black political leaders, Black mayors, if I'm not mistaken. And she talks in general terms about why she did it, but there's no meat on the bone. There's nothing there. It's all basically talking points that you give in a speech that Fran takes and says, hey, look, she delivered the goods. She told us what's going on. She didn't. So for a little background, there are two proposals out there, one by GAPA, the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability, and CPAC, I don't remember the name of the organization all the time, but CPAC is Citizen Police Accountability Council. For CPAC's version, the council will run the entire department and oversee COPA, what is now COPA, Civilian Office of Police Accountability, and the police board. GAPA, the Community Commission or Council, is fighting. At least originally, they were trying to get the ability to hire and fire the superintendent. Then they were trying to get the ability. It's changed multiple times. They were trying to get the ability to have a no confidence vote on the superintendent, and if that got backed up by the city council, they would fire him or her. It's complicated. There have been many, many, many versions of these ordinances through the last 5 years. And what has happened a little while ago, and we talked about it in a couple episodes ago, is Lightfoot broke off talks with these groups after a year and a half, maybe more of her term. We were also going a couple years before she even decided to run for mayor. It has been literally since the end of 15, early 2016, that something like this proposal has been active in Chicago. We still don't have it. Candidate Lightfoot said first 100 days in Chicago to be passed. Yes, we've had a pandemic, but we are cruising towards 2 years in office and nothing passed. So when she broke off talks a few months ago, she said, I'm done with this. I'm done with these versions. I'm going to introduce my own. Who's seen that one? As far as we know, nobody. So as the mayor talked point by point by point, exactly what's wrong with either ordinance? Nope. Silence. Has she shown the public her version? Nope. Nada. So all Fran did in this article was watch this speech by the mayor, take a couple of juicy quotes, throw them in a story saying, hey, Lightfoot explains why she did it. And there you go. You got a story. She didn't explain a damn thing. And all Fran did was take talking points. She may have got an email with the talking points. She may have not even had a transcriber herself. She may have just copied and pasted it into the article. It's a joke. This thing shouldn't have been printed. A lot of what Fran does shouldn't be printed. Make some calls, Fran. Do some investigative reporting. Do any reporting. Get a hold of the mayor's version, and then we'll know what she's got, what she thinks is wrong. Otherwise, this thing was just a joke. So we're going to move on to our last segment of the night. And it's really about why legislators got to get involved. The police accountability system is not going to work. It is failing. And that's our ordinance I'm going to talk about in a second. Police Settlement Transparency Ordinance. Transparency and Accountability Ordinance. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but this is overall the topic. We need to move away from, the police department, strong policy, strong accountability system, that's great. It doesn't work. If you want the police not to do things, it can't just be against their policy because it doesn't work. The system doesn't fire people. It doesn't. It doesn't discipline them regularly. It takes forever, right? It just doesn't work, right? When Jason Van Dyke shot Laquan McDonald, he wasn't worried about being fired. It's against policy. It didn't stop him. When John Burge did it was all against policy. It didn't stop him. It won't stop him. If you want to stop the Eric Gardners, if you don't want them doing chokeholds, you make the chokehold illegal. You make it a felony. If you want them not to put their knee on the neck of an arrestee, like George Floyd and Chauvin in Minneapolis, you make putting their knee on their neck like that a felony. They're going to stop doing it, or at least if nothing else, you're going to have a much easier time convicting them of crimes when they've done it, right? And I bring this up because this is outcry from the police department about the Chicago Police Department, the Fraternal Police, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, and I go on about the reforms passed in Illinois called HB 3653, which is basically this omnibus bill that passed a few weeks ago. We've had Sarah Stout on from the Chicago Council of Lawyers. We've had Joby Cates on from Restore Justice in the last few weeks talking about this bill, different aspects. Sarah talks about the front end stuff. Joby talks about sentencing and incarceration reforms. Oh my God, the world's on fire. How dare they make turning off your body camera when you're trying to hide stuff in important critical incidents and you're trying to hide and stop the inability of the public being able to see it, that can't be a crime. No, it can absolutely and should be a crime. Wait a minute, writing a false police report to cover something up, or knowingly letting one of your other colleagues do that and not saying anything, and it's a critical incident? Yeah, that's a crime. Oh my God, the FOP, especially here, John Catanzara, oh my God, some people might think, oh my God, what if some people might think it's crazy because it's just what they think, they don't know. No, you're being held to the same standard we are about the crimes you arrest us for. When you arrest us, it's just one person thinking I did something. And when I go in front of a jury of my peers, it's a jury of my peers convicting me. Why should you be held to a standard that is less than us? We don't want you turning off your body cameras. You know what? Putting it against policy isn't working. I got an idea. Let's make it a crime. Let's see if that works. When you look at the Laquan McDonald case, those officers had purposely screwed with changed batteries, put the batteries in upside down, made sure they weren't working, their dash cams and stuff. No, that's a felony. It shouldn't be just you might get fired for that or disciplined. No. That's a felony. You're doing it on purpose to hide things that you don't want the public to see. What don't you want the public to see? Usually you don't want public to see what is going on in a critical incident. It's got to be a felony. Applaud the Illinois General Assembly. I don't know, I've been doing this 25 years now. That might be the first time they've actually done something positive for police accountability in this state. It's about time something like that. We should champion that. They've got to go further. Right? And that's fair to the officers because you know why? They know ahead of time. You do that, it's a crime. Just like us. We know what we can and cannot do, the average citizen. Now they know also. When I beat up someone at my job, I'm not worried about whether I'm going to get fired. I'm worried about whether I'm going to go to prison. Why should it be any different? And we're not talking, you're always going to hear the extremist case. God, do the police love the extremist examples. Oh my God, what on this one-off and one-off? We're not talking about the one-offs. We can always agree where things are going to get murky. Don't worry, those cases most likely not going to get charged. We're talking about purposely hiding cases and critical incidents where people are being shot so that we don't see what happens. No, we need to see that. And I bet you we see a lot more of it now that they may be worried about going to prison. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what's left if that isn't enough. And this comes back to on a couple of weeks from now, no, a week from today, we have Alderman Maria Haddon on from the 49th Ward talking about the Anjanette Ordinance that she helped write. And it basically is going to regulate police use of warrants. First of all, it makes sure that they do all the due diligence and do all the research needed before they result in just breaking down someone's door. That might be a good idea. They didn't do it in the Anjanette Young case. No one can explain why. Did anyone get fired or disciplined? Nada so far. Nada. We need to make stuff like that a crime. So I'm generally in favor of the city council not micromanaging, but going after really critical issues for the public that's going to have an impact on the public, it's going to have an impact on policing, and it's going to have an impact in the trust between police and the communities. I am all for it. Do this regulation in a transparent way. Talk to the police themselves about how they feel about these things, get their impact, listen to all of it, write the legislation. And this all brings me to our police settlement transparency and accountability ordinance. So you're going to see a link on the chat. That link is for our Nation Builder site where you can go and register your support for this ordinance. What does the ordinance do? It basically creates a formal system for how the Chicago Police Department is going to respond to civil litigation involving the police department, both judgments and settlements. And it basically forces all kinds of information to the public to make it all public, involving what are the circumstances that are in the case that we're settling and why are we settling. I don't want to prevent the settlements, but I want every alderman to know why they're voting on it before they do. No repeats of the Laquan McDonald case or probably 1,000 more. That information is all going to be public before any vote is taken to settle the case. and pay off that settlement. Secondly, it forces and mandates the public safety committee and the city council hold a hearing every month about those cases. And it brings the leaders of the police department and the law department and the police accountability system to come and answer questions from the city council about what's being done, what happened in this case, and what's being done to make sure it doesn't happen again. Is it just an individual officer? Is it an individual officer issue and there's investigations going on? Or is this a training issue? Is this a more systemic issue where policies need to change, general orders need to change? Secondly, it makes reporting on if it's a baton case or a use of force type of case or a gun case or whatever it is, a racial slur case, how many of those are happening in this officer's history across that unit, across that district, across the department, and do things need to change to make sure we don't do it again? And in Chicago, you're talking 40, 50, $60 million a year. I think in 18, it was like $120 million a year the city spent on payouts. We've got to stop it. We've got to stop it for two reasons. One, the city can't afford it, and nor should we be having to be forced to pay it out. Imagine what that could do in the south and west sides, that money. And second of all, if we can prevent these incidents from happening, we are going to get less brutality and misconduct in the communities, which is great. And second of all, it's going to resolve the officers. They're going to have less negative experiences. They're going to have less suspensions, all of that. This needs to happen. The last thing it does is it forces all kinds of information publicly reportable. With every case, if they hired outside counsel, what law firm did they hire? What lawyers, how much were they paid? How many hours did they work? If it was handled strictly by the law department, who handled it? How many hours? How much money was spent? So we can get an idea. If you go to that Nation Builder site, you'll see we have some numbers about 4 or 5 years between 2006 and 2019 or 20. Did the city ever release how much money was spent? I think the media got that number out through a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. They got money out about how much the city spent paying out private lawyers, but not what firms, not what lawyers, how much are they spending? How much are they charging? We need to know that. There's been a cottage industry, the cops complain about a cottage industry of civil rights lawyers getting rich off this. Well, there's also another cottage industry of private counsel hired out by the law department making millions to defend these cases and drag them out. Because dragging them out suits their purposes because they're billing hourly. A quick settlement from a private lawyer is never going to happen because they're getting city money to drag it out. We need to get our heads wrapped around all of this. And then over time, as we collect this data and make it public, we can start comparing year to year. And we can start comparing unit to unit and district to district. I think this is a vital ordinance moving forward for Chicago. We have had some word there might be a subject matter hearing on it this month. We will let you know, but please go to the Nation Builder site and register your support for it. Also there, you can register to be part of the nation. We have 150 people from around this country, interns and volunteers from around this country working with our nation, doing crowdsourced research projects, social media advocacy, social media ambassador for the organization. We're expanding to the District of Columbia. We're expanding to the state of Maryland soon. Then we're going to hit Virginia. And then we're also going to start expanding this summer with a partnership with the American Constitutional Society. We will be expanding to 5 cities, at least 5 cities throughout the summer with our transparency work. So go to the Nation website that's in the chat. Go there, register your support for the police settlement transparency ordinance. You can go look under the projects tab at all the projects we got going. And then you can help us pass this such a needed ordinance. Okay. Thank you again to Bob, to Dylan, to Maggie. We really appreciate you taking the time. The Officer Support System is really great work. I hope it helps officers, and I hope through that it reduces violence and accountability issues on the back end. So the public is feeling less negative consequences about policing. Thank you all so much. We'll be back Wednesday at 5:30 Central. Thank you so much for being with us.